I promise I will get them done, hopefully by Wednesday, if not the latest Monday. It will be done by the end of the semester, yes. All right, so let's finish up this. I also decided I don't want to give you any more quizzes either. How's that? Yeah, because I just don't feel like it. So there you go. I just don't feel like it. Yeah, and I dropped the lowest quiz grade. Have I already done that on your? I'll go in and put that option. So the lowest quiz grade will go away. Will disappear.
This is Thanksgiving all over again.
There you go. No lowest test grade. Those you keep. But this one hopefully will boost your test grades substantially, right? This is going to boost your. All right. So, classifying organisms. Determining their evolutionary relationship, their similarities, is what taxonomy is. Again, we did this based on what? For years and years and years and years and years. Based on appearances, based on characteristic similarities within certain groups of organisms. Is this going to change? I can guarantee that now that we have what kind of information? DNA information. So it's the identification of species, the naming of species, and the classification of species based on those physical characteristic similarities. Oops. So, scientific names ease communication by unambiguously identifying an organism by genus and species. Very scientific criteria. Making it easier to recognize the discovery of a new species within that taxonomic tree. Linnaeus proposed the current taxonomic system. When? A very long time ago. I'm guessing. Yeah. So your science book, as far as this chapter goes, it's changed quite a bit if you go back and look at some older ones. And I'm guaranteeing it's probably going to change a lot more. So there's a two-part name. That's going to probably stay the same. Two-part name for each species, genus and species, and a hierarchical classification of species into broader groups of organisms. So you belong to a very broad group of organisms called what? No, that's specific. You're a mammal, you're also an animal. Yes? Who else is in your group? Yeah, all the other guys we call animals, all the other mammals. Give me an example of a mammal. A whale is a mammal. A bat is a mammal. Yes? So you're a mammal as well. Do you see how different groups? We used to memorize the little taxonomic tree many, many years ago, back in the day. They added things, believe it or not, even in my time. So domain didn't exist before. It used to be kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Yes? Domain didn't even exist. That's new. We added that to the list. Okay? So domain, big, huge, broad. By the time we get down to genus and species, we have very similar characteristics. So each species is assigned that two-part name or binomial consisting of a genus and a unique species name. So you are what? Your genus is Homo. Sapien is your species. Two-part name, italicized, Latinized, and with the first letter of the genus capitalized. So that's how we write it. So this is the broader picture and the hierarchy. Again, Linnaeus figured this out. That probably won't change, the naming scale, but the organisms that are in them might change. So, family, order, class, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, then genus and species. Again, domain, the biggest. We're reading the list backwards. What were the domains? We learned that before, didn't we? It was eukaryote, prokaryote, right? Eukarya and prokaryotes, what there was bacteria.
And the other one is
Archaea. Yep. Those were domains. So, eukaryotic cells. You know, those big cells with what? What were different about eukaryotic cells? They had an organized nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Very good. And we get to the kingdom, and we're talking about this little guy over here, the leopard. He's an animal. So are you in the same kingdom as a leopard? Yes. Yes, you are. Phylum, chordata. That means what? No. Spinal cords. Are you a chordata? Yeah. Yeah. Mammal? Yep. We're still sharing the same. Yep. Are you a carnivore? Yes. Yeah. Here's where we split. Feline. Panthera. Pardus. So this is where we split. So we're not in this group. But all of this we share with the leopard. Do you see where I'm going? So, the goal of systematics is to reflect on the evolutionary relationship. Where do we split from our commonalities? Biologists use phylogenic trees, and they're going to help depict hypothesis about evolutionary history of species and reflect that hierarchical classification of groups that are nested with more inclusive groups. So we've seen a lot of these. Yes? Same thing as what we just looked at, showing you where these guys' commonalities exist and where their split came about. So again, order, much more broad. Family, we start to separate out some of these guys. Genus, we separate them out even more. And species are very specific. So we look at similar structures, homologous structures. Homo means what? The same. So when we look at structures, we look at same structures when we put different animals or different organisms in some of these different categories. They can reflect variations of a common ancestral plan and are the best sources of information used for developing that phylogenetic tree and classify organisms according to their evolutionary history. Again, that's speculation. Whoa. What happened to that slide? Did that come out normal on yours? Yes. Okay. So looking at superficial structures of unrelated organisms, somehow relate them. Looking at analogies, not homologies. can also be a way to categorize some of these different organisms. So, molecular systematics, a little bit more, what's the word I want? Yeah, more refined, I think more definitive of comparisons and characteristics, are actually looking at DNA and some of the different amino acid sequences that are similar between organisms. We know that your DNA is going to tell us what about you as an organism? Well, it tells us the chromosomes. And what kind of what we make. Yeah, what kind of proteins we make and what those proteins do or function for us as organisms. So if we look at those relationships, why does somebody make a certain protein or certain enzyme, let's say, that has a certain function? Some fossils are preserved in such a way that some DNA fragments can be extracted. So when we start looking at some of this evidence, we might see more similarities between organisms. In the late 20th century, molecular studies and cladistics, why can't I say that word, led to the development of the domains. So when we looked at cellular evidence and some of the different enzymes that these different cells produce, we came up with the two domains.
What's the study of cladistics?
The study of those cellular functions. So looking at the cells, looking at the protein, right. So looking at the cell's function. Molecular biology is looking at the molecules made. Cladistics looks at what? The function of the cell. And that's where we saw two very distinct categories of cellular function. Bacteria and archaea in the prokaryotes, and in the complex cells, eukaryotes, membrane-bound organelles, and all of that good stuff. So that's the end of that. Now, I stole this, or borrowed this, I should say, with his permission from another of our instructors. Yeah.
Who study all of this stuff, are they surprised by the fact that we all have things in common? We live on the same
No.
planet, and we are completely dependent on everything else in this planet.
Correct.
So why is it a giant leap to think that we're all got something in common?
It's not. It is for some.
But the fact that we have it in common doesn't necessarily mean ancestral.
Oh! Now you're changing your tone. Do you notice what he just said? You contradicted yourself. Because you said we all somehow have something in common because we rely on all of the parts of this planet.
Right.
Correct. But then in the next breath you said, but it doesn't mean,
It just means we have something in common because we live on the same planet. We have to breathe and drink and reproduce the same way. So of course we're going to have things in common in our DNA.
Of course we are.
That doesn't mean I came from a monkey or a wolf or a leopard.
You're caught up with that, though. You're caught up with that. You're caught up with I came from.
Well,
Because you are neglecting to include the time. And that's what is a tripping point for you.
No, because we have fossils of dinosaurs. It would stand to reason if we have fossils of dinosaurs, then we would have fossils of every other invertebrate on the planet.
Not necessarily. Huh?
Boom.
But why? Why would we?
Think about it. Okay, we got fossils of dinosaurs, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Why can't we find a missing link then?
Why can't we find a fossil?
Because it didn't make a fossil. Does every single thing that dies make a fossil?
No.
Thank
Why
you.
didn't that?
It was in the wrong
There
place.
must have been, no.
I guess.
Deteriorated instead of falling into tar.
That's
or mud or something
exactly.
like that. It-
Are they going to find what's going to happen with your dead?
Well, hopefully I'll be burned and tossed in the wind.
There you go. Are you going to leave a fossil? What if you're a missing link? How did you know that didn't happen?
Maybe they burnt their ancestors.
Who knows?
Maybe they burnt the dead.
Chances are
There's going to be a fossil somewhere.
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 And they find new stuff all the
Now
time.
you just have to find it.
But they find new stuff all the time.
Right.
There's new
They
stuff
are
that they
finding
find.
new stuff all the time, but I'm saying,
Except a human.
yeah, they found everything.
Maybe it's under your house, and we're not going to find it because you built a house on top of it. You're hiding the missing link. Yes.
I just watched a program this past weekend where they found an Inca child that was preserved through permafrost,
Uh-huh.
and all of her skin or his skin, they don't know if it's a boy or girl because of the way she is or he is, but this beautiful, absolutely gorgeous little boy or girl lived those many years ago and was found in permafrost. So they are finding more new stuff all the time.
Did it look like a monkey or a human?
You're caught up with the whole monkey thing. But you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of missing.
They found a full baby woolly mammoth, a complete infant in permafrost and mud, and then they found an adult. So, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
These are all species that we've already known of.
Right. But that's what we have to remember. That's what we have to remember. And it's not like you came from this or you came from that. It didn't happen that fast. We have to realize, and that's what's hard for us to get our billions of years, okay, when we talk about life. And that's what's hard for us to get our head around. Because when we think of it, it's like, I came from, no. That's not what evolution is saying. That's how it's being interpreted. That's not what it's saying. Yes?
Maybe.
All right. So let's talk about our environment.
A lot of argument there.
Oh, there's tons of argument. But the problem is there's no way for you to say that you're right, and there's no way for to say I'm right.
Other than the fact that there is zero representation for that way. There's zero representation. There is one representation for my way, and that is the fact that this planet is populated by, 6 billion people? So, obviously we got here somewhere.
We got here, somehow. So that's a given. We got here somehow.
From a monkey? I don't think so.
Okay. So ecology.
So does that mean we're not going, we're going?
Yep,
on?
we're going on. I might go back a little bit, depending on how far we get with this. But this is one of the things that I noticed when I was teaching this class, or have taught. I try to go in order the book and all that good stuff. And then when we run out of time, we kind of skip this part. But I find that there's a lot of students that are really interested in this part. So that's why I'm going to skip ahead to this part so that we get it. And then if we have time, we'll jump back a little bit more and maybe talk about plants or something like that. But I'd rather talk about this because it's important that we realize how important our influence is on this planet. So, biotic, when we talk about ecology, your environment, we talk about all the living things in your environment and all the non-living things in your environment, both of which are just as important. For example, is water a living thing? No, it is not. Can you live without it?
No.
Absolutely not. So it's important for us to look at both. When we look at individual species or organisms, when we look at populations of organisms, some can be in the same species, and different species that live in the same areas that form things like communities and different conditions on this planet where different communities of organisms live, ecosystems, and how they interact, or interactions of species within their environment allow them to be sustained. And then this whole planet, which is the what? Biosphere. So on this planet, we have a lot of diversity, don't we? Give me an example of what I'm talking about. On this planet, there's a lot of diversity. Say we jump back to ecosystem. What's an ecosystem?
Your lawn out front.
Yeah, and what's on it?
Bugs, grass, birds, worms, butterflies, caterpillars, what have you.
Well, those are what? That are populating the different. Yeah. Now, can I see those same things that I see outside on our grass in the middle of the Mojave Desert? No. How come?
Water.
Yeah, different what? Different environment, different biotic and abiotic in those different places. So that's what ecologists study. Some of the different environments on the planet and some of the different organisms that inhabit those environments. And why? So we look at organisms and their ecology. We look at populations and groups in their ecology. For example, a few years back, this came up in our presidential election when certain people who were running for president wanted to save certain populations in a different group and was given a little bit of issue. Owls. Do you remember that? No. Another one, well, yeah, land development. We don't want to develop here because certain organisms will be wiped out. Yeah. Or, has anybody ever seen a pileated woodpecker?
Yep.
If you saw it, you'd know. They're about this big. Big, huge red tuft. Yeah, that's woody woodpecker. They're huge. First time I ever saw one, I moved to Maine. Looked out in the backyard. I thought it was a blackbird. Huge. Turned its head. I saw the big red one. Like, what the hell is that?
Get your gun, quick!
That's huge. Well, that bird relies on old-growth forests to survive because it eats some of the bugs that take over some of the older trees as they're rotting. So what happens to that bird when we wipe out a forest?
It either wakes him, it leaves or dead.
And changes the what?
The environment.
It changes everything, okay, in this whole grouping. So it changes a population, it changes a community, and it can change our ecosystem. So, characteristics that can be used to determine what a community is. Certain species, and lots of them, variety or differences within a community. And again, the diversity in that community. The abundance of individuals of a different species. For all the species, no matter what the diversity or species richness is, what's the important? Yeah, it kind of is the same thing, isn't it?
Redundant, ain't it?
It is redundant. Yes, it is. But what's kind of the bottom line for either of these things? What has to be there in a,
Bunch of different species.
well, no, what has to be in those communities in order for diversity and species, a variety of what?
Of individuals.
What do the species have to do in order to survive?
Keep a gene pool, keep a big gene.
Allow their gene pool, allow for reproductive success, and reproductive success is going to be achieved by me getting what?
New genes.
No.
Reproductive success. Food.
Yeah, I have to have enough food and enough space.
Water.
Yeah, and you need water too. We need water too, right? So communities change over time based on what? Yeah, the environment. What happens when the rainfall starts to go way down? What happens when I can no longer do what? I'm the pileated woodpecker. You chop down all my trees. I got to leave. So ecological succession is the change of these communities and their landscape over time. So there's primary succession occurs when soil hasn't formed, or secondary succession occurs on a distributed site with soil, so agricultural differences that return to natural patterns of community. My backyard is a great example of secondary succession changed.
Yeah, because you completely cleared out the land, put your backyard in there, and a new ecosystem arrived.
Well, my land before I moved on it and built my house was a whole bunch of trees. Before that, my land, according to the old guys in town, was a golf course. Before it was a golf course, it was a farm. Before it was a farm, it was a what? It was a whole bunch of trees in a forest. Different kinds of trees, though. Big, huge, hardwood trees. Somebody came in and did what? Cleared them all out to make the... No, first we had a farm, make a farm. Ripped all the roots out, tilled the land. What happened to a lot of the pileated woodpeckers that live there? They're gone. They have no more food. The land changed.
I was just thinking, the pileated woodpecker was probably smarter than a lot of people.
Yeah.
It left when the conditions didn't want
Yeah,
it.
it just left. We had to go somewhere else.
We just keep having babies.
Good point. So then, after the farmer was done, what happened?
They turned it into a golf course.
Well,
House, filled it all up, put in new hills and dirt,
Yeah.
water, and yeah.
Yep, made a golf course. Well, the golf course went under.
So it grew up
Trees grew up. What kind of trees, though? Not the same as they were originally. Exactly. Ones that'll grow what?
quickly.
Quick. Are there hardwoods in there?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard.
They're dotted throughout, as a matter of fact. I just happen to not be a fan of the pine tree. So guess what I did? Kill all the pine trees. Yes, get rid of them. They're gone. See how my landscape has changed? I hate the needles and the pine pitch.
Not only that, they breed mosquitoes.
Well, I love the smell. But I like hardwood trees better. So we see succession change based on what's going on in there, who inhabits it. A climax community, the final stable population because of the climate of an area, is what we call a climax community. Been there for a long, long time, but doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to stay that way. Because what could change? The environment could change. So, two types of succession. We see primary succession and secondary succession. We see as my golf course with lichens and mosses and rocks wasn't maintained anymore, the grasses developed some low shrubs, some higher shrubs. Who's gonna win in this succession? These guys. How come? They grew higher and blocked all the sun down here. These guys lose. That's how you can kind of tell how old a forest is, by who's hanging out there. If it's dark, it's a big, thick pine forest. Do we see a lot of bushes and shrubs? No, because these guys drown them out. Exactly, change the pH of the soil and mess with their growing conditions. So, we see different successions based on different organisms that live in those communities. Species in a community can interact in varieties of ways. They can compete for what's there. Yeah. And with the example of the trees, the shrubs lost because the taller trees were able to do what? Yeah, block a lot of that sunlight they needed to grow. So that's competition, when species compete for the same resources. Predation. So that's what's happening out in my backfield. Or animals that prey on other animals. I have lots of adorable little mice. And who likes that? Coyotes, a bunch of other organisms eat them. But they can reproduce what? Very quickly. Yes, they can. So predation is something we see when one species preys on another one.
So we practice predation every day.
Yep.
Because we're not necessarily preying on them, but we're slaughtering them and using them.
Correct. We're predators. We're carnivores. We have to eat meat, right? Well, we don't have to, but we choose to. And some of us do.
It's true. It's scientifically proven. There's 4 different blood types. If you have a blood type that builds a lot of acid in your system, you don't eat meat. You're going to get ulcers. That's all there is to it. You have to have something that's
Well, and
going to
the other thing that kind of indicates that we, as a species, need to eat meat is the fact that we need vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is only found in what?
meat.
Meat.
That's why I have teeth.
Where does it come from?
That's why I have
Meat.
it came from
So even though you're a vegetarian and you have to go take B12 supplements from something else, they're getting it from meat.
That blows the vegetarian right clean
Kinda.
out of water.
Yep.
It can't even get any further away from reality. Some people who don't build that
What
acid,
if you don't what?
you get sick.
Then you'll become anemic.
Unless your body doesn't build that acid, and you need to have less meat in your system. You have chicken or fish.
Well, that's meat too.
Right, but it's not red meat. They're all talking about red meat. Red meat, the worst thing since sliced bread. It's like the worst thing.
You didn't want to kill animals and eat.
The world, humans would survive without killing animals.
You could be a parasite when one species is a parasite on another. Parasitism. Who's parasites? Give an example. Ticks are parasites.
Please.
Yeah, there's some certain amoeba, intestinal amoeba, that are parasitic. Commensalism. What's that?
Moss on a rock? No, because that would break the rock. They're affected by that. because
Leeches.
We're affected by leeches.
How?
They leave a mark on our body.
Doesn't really bother us that much, does it?
Might not bother you. It bothers me.
Yeah, lots of people hate leeches. Mutualism. And this would be more like the guys that hang out on the sharks. The interaction benefits both species. So that little fish gets what? The birds on the rhinos. The birds eat the bugs off the rhinos. They get food, and the rhino doesn't have to deal with the nasty little ticks. So that is mutualism. So habitat, where these guys live, what space they inhabit is the habitat. Spatial location where a species is found. A niche, combination of an organism's role, bless you. In a community, its habitat, its interactions with other organisms. No two species can occupy the same niche. But one species might eventually die out. But can they occupy the same habitat? Yeah. Correct. So I can't remember, I don't know where he got this from. Is it in your textbook? Might have been from an old textbook. different bacteria, for example, or single-celled organisms that occupy different areas. When you combine cultures, we see that they will separate in population through subsequent days based on what's available for them. And that's not really a really great example. We'll find them both in the same habitat. Water environments is where they like to hang out. But they might hook on to something different in that water environment. Native versus invasive species. Native species, ones that have been here in a different group for a long, long time. We call them indigenous to the area. So give me an example of an indigenous trout versus, well, let's stick to the water.
Salmon.
Trout are more indigenous to this area.
Depends on what trout we're talking about.
Yeah. How about bass?
Bass are not native.
They're not native to this area.
Or not.
They were what?
They were brought here
They were introduced, and they became what?
invasive.
Invasive, because they were able to utilize a huge first food source that other what? Native species weren't able to do. So they took off because there's plenty of what for them? Food, which allows them to become more what? Reproductively successful, exactly. So invasive species, sometimes called exotic species, are ones that are brought into an area, and because they overtake the space, which is one of the requirements for all species as well, they might displace. Yeah, pike. In some area, oh, I can't think of the fish. Some Asian carp in down south are just
Yeah, they have a fish.
destroying. Yeah, they're destroying some of the native species.
They were stocking it in some ponds, and they're getting rid of the trout now. They were stocking it as a food source for trout. It's working out.
Now, how about milfoil?
That's terrible.
What's that?
That's an invasive weed.
Invasive plant.
Yep, invasive
Cut it in
plant.
half, it'll like float away, and then like find a place, and it'll just reattach to the bottom and keep spreading. So if you have
And
a
what
boat that goes through, to cut it up, put it in a bunch of pieces, and it'll like float away. That's why they have you check.
Or if you have it, and then what's another reason why they check your trailer? If you take some with you and then go into another area and deposit it there.
You have to like leave it out of water for like 30 days or something like that for it to die. It's ridiculous.
Yep. So it's allowed to, what it does is it grows very rapidly and chokes out a lot of the oxygen that's in the water in certain areas. So what happens to the wildlife, the fish, they die off because they don't have enough oxygen. So flow of energy is another thing that's important to look at when we look at different ecosystems, different areas. And a couple of definitions we need to know about ecosystem and energy flow. Autotrophs. What are autotrophs? They make their own food. Give me an example of an autotroph. Trees, plants, right? They carry on what? Photosynthesis. They take the carbohydrates they created from photosynthesis and they break them down for energy. So that's an example of an autotroph. Another name for those guys is a producer. What's a photoautotroph? Yeah, well, yeah, an autotroph can fall into that category, photoautotroph, because they use the energy from the sun to make their food. But we also have a group of organisms called chemoautotrophs. And they use their energy to make food by oxidizing inorganic compounds. Some of these guys are sometimes referred to as decomposers. Right? Yeah. Certain bacteria. Heterotrophs. or consumers. They have to consume nutrients that are made by autotrophs in order for them to survive. Give me an example of a heterotroph. Us. We can't make what? We make our own energy, but we can't make some of the substances we need to make the energy. Some of us need energy in the form of plants. Those are herbivores. So do we eat plants? Yes. Yeah, we're actually omnivores. Carnivores eat what? Meat. Your dog does not want vegetables. Your dog wants meat.
My dog don't mind vegetables, rivers, meat, fat.
Correct. And then we have organisms called omnivores, which is what you guys are. Eat both plants and meat. And then decomposers, they break down that organic matter. Without decomposers, can we have all of these other guys? No, because the nutrients that they break down are going to be absorbed by autotrophs and used by heterotrophs. So decomposers and scavengers are going to break down dead organic matter. And what's that called? Dead organic matter. Detritus. So you've probably all seen this in one way, shape, or form at some time or another, how everything is connected. So autotrophs and heterotrophs of a community are going to create an energy flow. And that's energy flowing in the form of nutrients through any given ecosystem. So energy, along with nutrients, has to flow between all of these different groups. As energy flows from one level of an ecosystem to the next, a large fraction of it is lost. And generally it's lost in the form of what? Heat. But that heat is important because heat is going to cause molecules to move at a faster rate. When they move at a faster rate, what are they going to be able to do? Bang into each other and create more chemical reactions. So they're all tied together with respect to energy flow through the system. And you probably have heard some of these terms, and you probably even discussed them in elementary school. They ringing a bell? Energy flow through an ecosystem can be illustrated as a food web or a food chain. So a grazing food web begins with what? Plants. And give me an example of who might be in a grazing food web. Yeah, cows, eating what they were meant to eat. Grass, right? Goats, sheep, cows. How about a detrital food web? The decomposers. So who's going to eat that stuff? Plants, right? And then that is connected to the grazing food web, right? You see where we're going with this?
Wait, it begins with.
Yeah.
But isn't that like maggots?
No, it's like moss and
Well, it could be, but yeah. Well, or bacteria in the ground, soil. Think soil, worms. The level of nourishment within a food web or chain is called a trophic level. And the energy that's lost moves from one trophic level to the next, and the flow of energy can be depicted by an ecological pyramid.
Corn. Reuse those same nutrients.
Correct, and then
you gotta put nutrients back in the ground to grow more.
and then after you eat the corn, what do you do with what's left over?
You decompose it.
You poop it out, yes, and the plant that's left, Exactly. So in this one, we see energy flow. So we see a producer, a plant, photosynthesis, making energy. Who's going to eat it? An herbivore, those nasty little caterpillars that always destroy all of our lovely tomato plants in our garden. Who eats those? Birds. Secondary consumers. So see these terms. Primary consumer would eat the producer. The secondary consumer would eat the primary consumer. And the tertiary consumer would eat the secondary consumer or the primary consumer. Because hawks can eat little baby birds too, right? What else do they eat? Everything and anything they want. Yeah, little cute little bunnies. They eat chickens. They eat cats, small dogs. Huh? Your little Yorkies? Hopefully. Geez, that would be a big bird. But they're the tertiary consumer. Are you a tertiary consumer? Yes.
We're tertiary over that tertiary.
So we see energy flow through any given ecosystem and see how all of these arrows somehow what? They connect to each other, which is so important.
All linked. Everything on this planet is linked to everything else.
Correct.
Everything.
Because of exactly what you said in the beginning of class, because of our similarities with respect to what we need for survival. So there's a link on this planet. That's the reason we can survive on this planet.
But the most important part of this whole process is something that you never even see. Those people who don't get out of the city would never see it. Right?
Doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
The decomposers, right.
So
That's the most important part.
So you agree that there's things on this planet that you haven't seen that might exist.
Yeah, there's many things on this planet that I haven't seen.
Just saying. Oh! So again, we see a link here in this diagram with producers,
It's called a running joke.
plants, primary consumers, insects, usually fall in that primary consumer category, and smaller animals, rodents. And then secondary and tertiary. Is that iguana looking thing? This guy?
It kind of does look like it.
He's eating an ant.
It kind of looks like it is.
Oh yeah. No, I think he ate a mouse. That's his tail.
That's his joint. He's having a good time with his rat fighting.
He's smoking a mouse. And again, we see some of the different food chains, terrestrial chain versus aquatic chain. Yeah, oh yeah. A killer whale will eat,
Seals, right?
yeah,
Sharks.
or large carnivorous fish too. So certain fish will eat smaller things, plants, plankton. There's two types of plankton. There's phytoplankton and there's zooplankton. And then just basically everybody gets bigger on up the line with respect to the aquatic food chain. Size, though, you know, we think size, the bigger you are, yeah, well, there's some gigantic plankton eaters.
Yeah.
Who?
Whale.
Whale. The blue whale, the biggest organism on this planet, eats plankton.
The whale shark does too.
See, that's why I don't swim in the ocean.
That's why you don't want to get eaten.
I'm not going to go in there.
Right, they look at me like an hors d'oeuvre.
Yeah.
A little snack for later.
So one of the things that makes this planet habitable is the fact that we have a water cycle. We have some way of providing water to all of these living organisms, because that was one of the criteria for living, right? We had to have a cell in order to characterize me as living, yes? And what did that cell need in order to survive? Water is one of the big things, one of the first things on the list. So a water cycle, a way of cleansing that water and cycling it through all of these different energy levels, is important in any given ecosystem to support living organisms that we're familiar with. So precipitation, water vapor condenses. Runoff, excess water on the surface runs and pools. Surface water is the stuff that stays there for our trees, the dew that accumulates for our grass. Groundwater, down deep in the ground. A lot of what we discussed in the last class talks to us about this planet and the fact that there's a lot of water we can't even see on the planet that's underground. And then evaporation, surface water changing to water vapor, creates what we call a water cycle. And it also cleanses water too for us. Rainwater is much cleaner than groundwater because it's more what?
No, I disagree.
Well, nowadays I disagree with that too. But in the old days it was a better description.
I'm actually thinking about building another well, and I'm gonna excavate all of the land and then go buy gravel and sand. to put
Because
around my wells.
what does that do to the water?
It's a natural filter.
It filters out. So a lot of the particulates filter out in groundwater too. So the water cycle is extremely important for all of the different ecosystems on this planet. You drink groundwater because it's filtered through that dirt and and a lot of the natural charcoal or coal that's in some of the different rocks.
Called, like living glass houses, you know, little things that live in glass houses. You guys read
Yes.
glass thing? I forget what they're called, Zoe something or other.
Zoidy something's rather.
Yeah, they say, what kind of houses do they say these things live in with glass? Because they're all silicone. That's what
Oh. Gotcha. Now I know what you're talking about. The other really important component, diatomaceous earth. Yeah. And those are diatoms in there.
Diatoms, that's what it is. Why did you ring a bell when you said diatomaceous earth?
Phosphorus is another extremely important component for living organisms as well. So the phosphorus cycle, which is kind of similar to what we saw in the other cycles in energy flow, is important for living organisms in our ecosystems. Phosphorus from weathering of rocks gives us phosphate, PO4, with a charge of -3. Producers utilize the phosphate in their metabolism. So who's a producer? Plants. Consumers acquire phosphate by doing what? Eating the producers. Phosphates return to the ecosystem during what? Decomposition of the producer that ate it in the first place. That's why, and there was kind of a neat example in the old textbook we used to use for Intro to Gen Bio about a discussion of a hypothesis. And one of the things that this fellow did in his experiment was look at using, rather than fertilizers, commercial fertilizers, using ground up old plants. So in your garden, for example, when you plant, anybody keep a garden here? Can you plant the same thing over and over again in the same place year after year after year? How come? Yeah, because certain species are going to occupy a certain what? Niche, right? Or take from the environment a certain thing. If you keep planting that same plant in the same place, that thing, whatever it is going to be taken out of the soil. You have to rotate your crops or fertilize it, put the nutrients it needs back in there. Now, the perfect nutrient would be what? The dead plant. So that's what this experimenter did.
I thought we've been doing that for years. Isn't it called compost?
Right. But what happened with the introduction of artificial fertilizers?
People got cheap and tried to do shortcuts.
They tried to do shortcuts. And what is that good for good for the soil? No. So this experimenter proved that.
Except for the bottom line, they're not that funny.
Correct. So by taking the plants, grinding them up, composting, using that, this experimenter proved that that was better for the plant in the long run. Because with the help of the decomposers broke down the consumer, the plant itself in this case, and then reused all of the parts needed to make a new plant. So that was much more efficient. Took longer, and that's why, you know, it's all about the bottom line with respect to dollars and cents. Another very important cycling of nutrient is nitrogen. Nitrogen is extremely important for us to make our proteins. And proteins are important in making you, muscle. So nitrogen is used by producers. We see it in the form of ammonia. Nitrogen is N, NH4, found naturally or derived from N2 by nitrogen fixation. You gardeners, have you ever put any nitrogen into your soil? What were you putting it in there for? For your plants, right? So nitrogen is an important component in plant growth. And nitrogen fixation is an important step chemically for our plants to grow. Well, certain plants sometimes in our garden ward off other unwanted visitors.
Yeah, but marigold supplies nitrogen also.
Does it?
For some reason.
I thought marigolds was for, or I thought marigolds were to deter other invaders. Certain bugs, certain animals don't like the scent of marigolds. Yeah, I don't think anybody likes, yeah, that I want to say bitter smell, but I think that's what marigolds are for. Yeah. Nitrates, NO3, produced by ammonia by nitrification. And in this, we see the nitrification process that works through all of the wonderful connections that we have. Fertilizers, try to put that in there. What's the best fertilizer? Organic matter. Organic matter is also going to provide us with minerals and ammonia as well. So we look at this crazy diagram where we see the importance of bacteria with respect to the nitrogen cycle to help us with ammonia. The decomposers and their role in the nitrogen cycle, allowing that nitrogen to be free to be used by plants. So plants can take it up once it has been broken down, and fixing that nitrogen in the root system of a plant can help it to get the nutrients that it needs to produce all that it has to with respect to fruit, its leaves and the fruit that it might have to produce as well. So bacteria are very important in helping the root system of plants to fix nitrogen, and that allows them then to bring up other nutrients that they need in order to be producers. Carbon is another one. So carbon, and we know that all organic molecules are made of carbon. Carbon's a very important building block or component of all our organic molecules. We talked about organic molecules when we talked about those living cells, right? Those big, huge proteins all have carbon in them. So carbon comes from several different sources. Carbon comes from the gases or dissolved carbon dioxide in liquid. So from our environment. Carbonate is another one. When we burn things, carbon is the leftover, what's behind. So wildfires and volcanoes can also be a source of carbon. Much of Earth's carbon is tied up in the bodies of organisms because we use that carbon to make all of those organic molecules to make living organisms. It's also tied up in things like limestone, carbonate shells. What else? Fossil fuels. Now, normally, we wouldn't be getting at those fossil fuels, right? If we were living on this planet and hadn't figured out how to get at them, we would just be releasing back into the environment in the carbon cycle what would naturally happen through decomposition and the whole energy flow that we just talked about, right? But us very smart humans have been able to do what? Pump tons of fossil fuels out of its previously under the ground, not accessible
So really,
form.
we're helping the carbon cycle.
That's right.
Where, well, oh, that's so nice of us. Unfortunately, too much carbon in the environment can do what? Or block what? All of those other arrows, like photosynthesis for the producer or respiration. So, pumping too much carbon into the atmosphere. Well, it doesn't cool the Earth down, it actually traps all of the heat given off. Correct. So too much carbon in the atmosphere too fast, and it's difficult for all the other organisms to take it up at fast enough a rate. So too much carbon in the atmosphere can be detrimental to living organisms.
But they've had effects on this planet
Absolutely.
where they pump more carbon in a week than we as humans have pumped in here the entire time we've been on the planet.
Not really.
When it
The
actually
other thing is,
Mexico
and what happens,
freezes the earth.
okay, now continue that thought. What happens when those events have occurred?
Extinctions.
Correct. So is
But
it
then
good
it
for the,
rebounds.
well, it rebounds, but too much carbon in the atmosphere, is that good or bad for living organisms as we know it?
If you want to keep the
No.
the
No, 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 no,
right now,
no.
then it would be bad for the system.
Correct.
But if you want to let the thing flow the way it always does, then it will die. Things will die, and then new things will be born, and the economy will come back, or not the economy, but the ecosystem will come back. It'll be a different one.
Correct.
It's just a circle of life. Life is going to find a way to survive, no matter what, whether we're here to enjoy it or not.
Correct.
Remains to be seen.
I agree with that. But again, too much carbon in the system, in your ecosystem, can be detrimental to many of the living organisms in your ecosystem.
The little bunny.
Now, the little bunnies will probably survive more than we will. We're greedy. So all of these things produce carbon and put it into the atmosphere. Cellular respiration, those consumers, but using sources that typically wouldn't be spewed into the environment because they'd be hidden underground are being added to the carbon in the atmosphere by who?
Us.
You. So the arrows are a good indicator of carbon in the atmosphere. Photosynthesis, respiration, we see that puts carbon in the atmosphere. The ocean and the chemistry that's going on in the ocean on any given day also puts carbon into the atmosphere. But who's putting lots and lots? Yeah. So combustion of fossil fuels is creating a big spike in atmospheric carbon dioxide. And this is only over 2,000 years. Has this spike happened before? Yes. This high? No. So, based on what? Well, actually, based on ice samples, ground samples.
But I watched a report on the History Channel, the Science Channel, something that had, they were core ice. They were going down miles,
And what usually follows that? Extinction. Yes? Good. So, some of the major ecosystems on this planet consist of terrestrial ecosystems or biomes, things on the ground, forests, grasslands, deserts, tundra, all very different from each other, yes? Then we also have marine ecosystems. We have ones that have a lot of sun exposure or closer to the surface, intertidal zones. Do you ever go to the beach and follow the tide? Can you imagine as an organism living in an intertidal zone what you have to go through on any given day? Lots and lots of water, no water. Yes? So we see, yeah. The Narctic zone, a little further down. The oceanic zone, that's, no. That's still in the ocean. So we're not as affected by tidal in an intertidal zone. But we're exactly. More sunshine available to us, more plant growth, basically. The oceanic zone and the benthic zone, we're talking about deeper ocean. Freshwater versus saltwater. So when we talk marine ecosystems, we're talking about a saltwater system. When we're talking freshwater ecosystems, we're talking about who? Ponds and lakes. There's some good pictures on page 382. And 380. And we see some of the different zones in a lake versus an ocean. Again, fresh water is what you need as humans to do what? Yeah, so you need to intake fresh water, and a lot of organisms need to intake fresh water, and that has to do with the tonicity of your cells, water moving in and out of your cells. We want it to move at a consistent rate. Yeah? Isotonic? Don't know. Yep, tonicity. Yep. And you looked at the tonicity of solutions, how fast water moves in and out of cells. And that's what that experiment was all about. So we will pick up with this slide 29 on Wednesday. And hopefully Marie will